Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this new webinar organized by RIT in Dubai. Let's welcome Professor Sanjay Modak, Chair of the Graduate Programs and Research Department at RIT Dubai, to introduce this webinar.
Hello, I am Dr. Sanjay Modak, Chair of the Graduate Programs and Research Department at RIT Dubai. RIT Dubai offers two programs in this department, the Master of Science in Professional Studies, City Sciences, and the same in Data Analytics. The City Sciences Master's program is unique in two ways. First, it provides a 360-degree view of how a smart city works and what it takes to get there. Secondly, it is one of only two such master's programs offered anywhere in the world. We have successfully graduated 5 cohorts since its inception 6 years ago, and now I'd like to introduce to you a person who has helped make this program what it is today. Dr. Philippe Bouvier has been a very important part of this program since the start. He's more than just a theoretical teacher, as he has been at the forefront of actual smart city development in all parts of the world and a leading practitioner and advocate of smart cities today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Philippe Bouvier.
Thank you, Professor Sanjay Modak, for this very kind introduction. Let's get started. Welcome back. My name is Dr. Philippe Bouvier. I am professor at RIT Dubai in Urban Digital Transformation. I am also president of INREGU, the French National Institute of Research in Urban Management. In this webinar, we will discuss the lessons learned from the impacts of pandemics on cities. I will address 4 key questions. What is the history of pandemics? Can pandemics have positive impacts on cities? Will the current pandemic disrupt the development of our future cities? And what are the new trends in cities due to COVID-19? We are in a time of crisis, and in Chinese, the word crisis is written with 2 kanjis, danger and opportunity. It means you must decide wisely which direction you want to follow. The good news, cities always innovate after a crisis. Pandemics have destroyed cities in the past. Could this happen again? What do you think? Actually, I hope that this webinar will help you to make up your mind on this question. Let's understand from our history why we have pandemics today. A long time ago, we were nomads. 50,000 years ago, we were hunters and gatherers. Of course, viruses, fungus, bacteria already existed at that time. But the groups of people, nomads, they were spread over large areas. So the propagation of any diseases stopped rapidly at that time. 12,000 years ago, we created villages. We developed agriculture and animal farming. By being closer to the animals, we got infected by zoonoses. You know, these are the viruses that can move from animals like pigs, birds, to the human race. And with agriculture, we were closer to stagnant water, and we got infected by waterborne diseases with the mosquitoes, due to the mosquitoes. 7,000 years ago, villages continued to grow. Successful governance was innovated, and we created cities. But the hygiene in cities were not sufficient, even if the Romans did their best. And with more and more people in cities, it was easy for airborne diseases to spread. It was the beginning of epidemics. People moved more and more to cities to find jobs. and the urbanization continued to grow. Then people started to travel across countries and continents. International trades emerged, and we developed globalization. Infectious disease were no longer limited to cities, but could now spread all around the globe. These were the initial conditions to create global pandemics. Our history has a long list of pandemics, which have actually shaped our cities and our societies. But it looks we have forgotten the main ones, actually. Our past is paved with famous pandemics. Let's take the example of the Black Death. It killed 200 million people in the 14th century. And that is, in Europe, it was 60% of the people who died there. But currently, we still have 600 cases of plague in the world. Another famous pandemic is the smallpox. It killed tens of millions of people. We were lucky we created a vaccine in the 19th century, and that disease was eradicated in 1980 only. That's quite recent. The Spanish flu cannot be forgotten. It killed 50 million people in 1918. But this number must be compared with the number of people who died during the First World War. They were 20 million. So you see the pandemic, 50 million, and the World War 20 million. But at school, we are learning more about the war. And currently, the COVID-19 pandemic has killed 2.8 million people in the world and infected more than 120 million worldwide. Sure, this pandemic will join the list of our historical pandemic. Can pandemic have positive impacts on cities? We have learned a lot from previous pandemics. We have learned how to respond when the outbreak. We have created innovations to face the new situation. We have adapted our cities and master plan. And we understand better the societal impacts that they produce. Let's take some examples. In terms of responses, we created government health boards to provide advice on the public health response. We imposed quarantine of people and goods to identify any infectious disease. We forbade public gathering to limit any propagation. And we also noticed in the past that states strengthened their power over individual lives in those period of pandemics. Does this for initial response ring a bell during this COVID-19? Because actually, we have been living the same in this crisis. But do you know when these responses were invented? They were invented 600 years ago during the Black Death. So it's interesting to notice that the measures we had during our medieval time, we are actually following the same today. Also, over the centuries, escape communities were created where no one came in and no one went out. It was noticed during the Spanish flu in 1918 that this concept was quite efficient. And in the 19th century, we invented a global monitoring system of outbreaks where each country in the world would communicate of any outbreaks when they have one. Previous pandemics also have boosted innovations to respond to the new situation. After some pandemics, we observe that there is a shortage of labor. Like after Black Death, when 60% of Europe disappeared, there was a huge shortage of labor. And today, during COVID-19, countries in the Middle East or in Asia, they are actually asking for more workers to continue to develop the country. So this shortage of people actually boosted the others to innovate. Like they did some mechanical innovations like windmills, water mills, and more recently, all these digital innovations with all these apps that we have. Medical innovations were also created with antibiotics and vaccines. The vaccine for the smallpox in the 19th century was the first one. We also innovated in our urban infrastructures. The sewage system was reinvented after the Great Stink in London in 1858. The clean water system was also reinvented after an outbreak of cholera in the 19th century in the UK, in London, where we added sand filters and chlorine to purify the water so it could be drinkable. Also, the water drainage was reinvented in agriculture because we needed to get rid of this stagnant water, and we replaced stagnant water by a continuous flow of water. In cities, we also adapted them to better live during pandemic situation. For centuries, we had this miasma theory. If the air smells bad, that means there is an infectious disease. So cities adapted their design and their urban plan with parks, and in order to create an area, a zone where we could have clean air, where people could breathe. We also developed large streets to improve social distancing. Reforms in housing were also imposed in order to fight against crowded areas, living places. We get rid of all stagnant water in cities. And an interesting thing was that the value of the meter squared did rise on top of the hills because some villas and the upper class society actually started to build their villas on top of the hills in order to have a clean air. We also have learned a lot about the impacts of pandemics in our society. We have learned that it is important in those times of crisis that we need to communicate with the people, and we need to increase their awareness about what's going on. Why are we having these type of measures? They need to understand that, because it is a time where our civic capital is actually challenged. Because with all these measures which are against our will, we understand that actually the government understands that there is a level of social acceptance. Like, for example, in India in the 18th century, when there were an outbreak of cholera, the British, it was a British colony, so the British army was burning houses where the Indians were living when they were suspecting any cases of cholera, and then they were separating the women and the men should they are suspected of being infected. And these measures actually were not understood from the locals, Indians, and they responded with violence. They totally disagree with that. And we are observing this violence even in Europe, in Germany, in France, and in the States. People, they have a level of social acceptance because these pandemics are creating psychological traumas. And in this time, there are some myths and conspiracy theories which are emerging. During this COVID-19, have you heard of any conspiracy theories? So people are living, the society is living with stress. With the fear of being infected, there is this frustration of freedom and boredom to stay in quarantine. In fact, these changes have created the ground for larger and more livable cities and prosperous cities. Thanks to those pandemics, we have been able to accommodate, to transform our medieval cities into livable cities. Because you have to remember that during our medieval cities, until the 19th century, cities were not very large. We were 10,000 to 100,000 people, rarely above 200,000. Because the disease were self-regulating the population inside cities. Cities were actually death traps. It was difficult to survive in cities. And by cleaning them, by adapting these cities to live in times of epidemics and pandemics, we have now created the ground for livable cities. And we are happy that only since 1960, we can accommodate more than 1 billion people living in cities. And today, in 2020, we are 4 billion people living in cities. So today, pretty much worldwide, the urban life expectancy is higher than the rural life expectancy, which is a complete reverse from 200 years ago. But the combination of larger concentrations of people in cities, much larger concentrations of animals on factory farms, the global warming and the continued rise of global travel, as well as the range of recent outbreaks, suggest that we should be prepared for a future pandemic. What has been the global trend in the development of cities, and where are we now? Hundreds of years ago, the medieval city, people were going to the cities to get protection, to get security and safety. It was a time of ruthless battles between tribes and countries. So people were looking for safety. If I jump in time in the 50s, people are going to the city, are moving to the city to find jobs, to enjoy themselves, to go to restaurants, meet their friends. They are looking for a better quality of life. It's the time of the modern city. Then in the 70s, something new happened. We invented the fiber optics. And with the fiber optics, we invented digital communications, broadband communications, internet. This is the time of the digital city. And with the digital city, we are showing that the use of technology is creating value in cities. Then in the year 2000, lots of names, new concept of cities are flourishing. You can have intelligent city, green cities, eco cities, world cities, ubiquitous cities, etc. It's a time where we are sharing information and we are trying to find what would be the next concept for the city. But all these words were confusing. So in 2009, a new concept, a new value proposition was created, the smart city. And the value proposition of the smart city was that we could use technology to solve any kind of urban problems. So if you develop technology in your city, you will create a better city. That's the smart city development that we have been living since 2009. So where are we now in 2020? Breathing can kill in 2020. Kissing can kill in 2020. What's going on? What's going on? What have we missed in the development of our cities? How can we create the top of the art of the cities and not be able to breathe air in 2020. What's going on? Once again, in this pandemic, mankind is challenged. So, will the current pandemic disrupt the development of our future cities? Let's ask this question to the World Health Organization. They say, the world does not have the capacity to handle epidemics. Wow, that doesn't sound very optimistic. Countries and cities have fragile health systems. Yes, we all have observed this in all the countries where we learned that we had to flatten the curve to reduce the number of people in intensive care units. Pandemics are not going away. A pandemic might come back from an old source, like influenza, or emerge from a new source, like the SARS-CoV-2. So, how should we look at this pandemic in 2020? Well, this is a wake-up call. This is a wake-up call because we have, in fact, created the best ground in our cities to have pandemics. With global travel, climate change, urbanization, human-animal contacts, cities now are creating the best conditions for new diseases. In the 14th century, it took few years for the plague to become a pandemic, a global pandemic. In the 18th century, it took 2 years for the cholera to move from India to UK. In 1918, during the Spanish flu, it took 4 months to start from the US and to spread all around the world. And in 2019, with the COVID-19, it only took a few hours to travel the world. We can travel halfway across the globe faster than a virus can incubate today. In 1990, we were 1 billion people traveling by air. Today, we are more than 4 billion. We see that infectious disease could spread very fast. Urbanization is also a big concern. In 1950, only 30% of the world lived in cities. In 2009, half of the population did live in cities. And it is expected in 2050 that actually 68% of the population will live in cities. So urbanization is growing significantly. And this creates new challenges with urban infrastructures, housing, sanitation, transport, and healthcare facilities. They need to be adapted to that growth because risk of increasing number of people living in overcrowded and unhygienic environments are increasing. So due to urbanization, infectious disease could thrive more and more. Climate change is a big concern. The insects which are in the hot and warm zone of the globe, they are moving north, where areas are getting warmer due to the global warming. And those insects carrying disease are spreading more widely, and their numbers are increasing. Climate migrants, they also could spread illnesses from their country of origin to the country of destination. Or they could become vulnerable to infectious disease that they will get in the country of destination. The permafrost is also a concern. There are ancient viruses which are buried for millennia under the permafrost in Siberia. What's going to happen when the ice will be melted? Also, with the global warming, it's a source of flooding. There are risks of flooding that could outbreak waterborne diseases like cholera. So, due to the climate change, new infectious disease could emerge. Human-animal contacts. There are increased contacts between humans, wildlife, and livestock. And these diseases, they can cause potential lethal unknown, coming from visons, rats, bats, pangolins, birds, camels, pigs. Many of the recent disease epidemics have originated this way. HIV, COVID-19, MERS, Ebola. There is an increasing risk of outbreaks of zoonotic disease. Due to human-animal contacts, in fact, lethal zoonotic infectious disease could surface, and they are unknown today. So it seems that pandemics are accelerating. More and more outbreaks are discovered every year. This suggests that cities should be prepared. We are selecting, differentiating those viruses with their reproduction number. And the more it spreads, the faster it spreads, the better it is for this virus. But it should not be too deadly, because if it is too deadly, it doesn't have the time to spread. It happens that COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2, is a good candidate for being a good disease. So it's a time for change. This period is full of uncertainty, but it's neither unprecedented. We had pandemics since thousands of years, and nor it was unpredictable. We had so many outbreaks in the past. So how cities should respond to this disruption? Some of you will say, oh, but with millions of unknown viruses in nature, efforts to find the next dangerous virus before it emerges in the human populations may be next to hopeless. Well, I hope not. You don't know which next epidemic is going to be. You don't know when it is going to be. You don't know where it is going to be. You don't know what it is going to be. So the more we know about what's out there, the better we are able to prepare. What are the new trends in cities due to COVID-19? Where should we invest? Where should we innovate? Pandemic is a separating force. During this time, we have less information. We are not well informed. Even the governments, they are not well informed. There are also less social bonds. We are isolated from our friends, or even from our family members. So we need to adapt faster. We were not prepared. In 2019, 2020, and due to this pandemic, two big trends appeared in the world. The first is the environment. There is a transition towards something that is more ecological and environmental. With this pandemic, people understand, like they had forgotten, that we are mortals. And this virus, which we can't see, is deadly to some of us. So people feel more aware about the sense of the environment and how this environment is damaged, and the sense of humanity, how to survive mankind. In Europe, there was many elections of mayors in 2020, and mayors from green parties got elected with a significant percentage. So it shows that the population is well aware and is determined to work towards an environment that should be sustainable and healthier. Even in China, the government is saying that is asking the people to grow crops on the balconies, as an example. So we are more conscious about the environment thanks to this pandemic. Of course, the trend of the global warming started before the pandemic, but now we understand what it means to die. The second big trend is online services. I don't need to explain that because you all are living in this trend. Everything went online, digital. In fact, this pandemic will catapult the world into even more advanced technology. You have seen how fast we develop technology in the last 12 months, 16 months. We are moving fast forward. And the innovations that we are creating, they are emerging from real needs and experiences. Could we innovate and find a solution to this face mask? This is not convenient. Can someone find, this is a real need, a real pain. Can you find an innovation to replace this face mask? Innovation will emerge from real needs because we have real needs now during this pandemic. To give you an example, this is a study done by McKinsey. They are analyzing companies who are looking to digitize their activities. They were planning to do it in the coming months. And actually, due to the COVID-19 situation, they had to move faster. And the study says that the companies have moved 20 times to 25 times faster than expected before the pandemic. For example, they wanted to increase remote working, move to remote working before the pandemic. And they say it will take 454 days. In fact, due to the pandemic, they did it in 11 days. This is an acceleration factor of 43. Also, they wanted to increase the customer demand for online purchasing and services, moving online. So they were planning to do it in the next 585 days. In fact, they did it in 22 days, which is 27 times faster than it was planned. We are moving fast forward in this pandemic. So where are the areas where we should focus for innovation and investment? Technology. Well, you see that we are surrounded by innovations, technological innovation during COVID-19. Healthcare, this goes without saying. We need to help our healthcare system. We need to innovate this healthcare system and provide them with more resources. Climate change. This is a trend that started before the COVID-19 crisis, and it will continue because now we are more aware that we can die anytime. The urban governance, urban management of the city is going to change. Our society is going to change. The way we are moving in cities, interacting between us is going to change. So the governance of the city is also going to change. Business models are going to be adapted. You have noticed the lack of supply of food, of medicine. You have noticed how the supply chain was impacted. And we turned sometimes to local solutions because we could not get drugs from overseas during the lockdowns. So business models are going to be reinvented. There is a domino effect because cities are complex systems. They are systems of interconnected systems. That means that whatever happens in one side of the city will have an impact on other sides of the city. We need to develop a systemic approach to solve urban problems. Those changes that we have observed, the first one is in our life, we changed our workspace. We all are working remotely. This is the new normal. And some of us, we are still working remotely and we don't even know where is our office since 1 year or more. We are working with virtual organizations now, even if that is causing some mental health problems all around the world. Companies, they are downsizing their office spaces, and even they are saying to their employees, don't come back. You no longer have an office. How could we improve the work from home experience in the future? This is another area of innovation. New distance services have been developed. All this online delivery-based services economy continue to grow. And actually, during the SARS pandemic in 2003 in Asia, it boosted the e-commerce in Asia and in China. Now, it continued to boost our e-services, including like healthcare, telemedicine, online education. Some universities are just working online now. Secondary education is also moving part-time online to 100% online. We have online museums, online zoos. Yes, in Japan, for example, we have in one zoo, the staff, they recognized that their animals, their wildlife animals, they were depressed. So they created video Skype calls. So you can now have a Skype call with a lion, any of those wildlife animals, and can talk to the baboon and explain to him what's going on in the world and why he's watching your face on the screen. So we are really innovating and finding those new solutions, crazy ones, that we would never have thought before the crisis. I would never had called the baboon before this crisis. We are no longer using coins since the pandemic. Only contactless payments are working. But it's not finished. What new distance services do you think we could create? Innovation is limitless. If you can call a baboon, The supply chain has been challenged. We have suffered from, in some countries, with lack of food or some of the equipment we wanted, lack of medicine, short of supply, because, we had lockdowns. So international globalization was no longer working. The question was, how much global should we have versus local? And sometimes locally, we cannot find the appropriate equipment and material. So in this crisis, we have realized how little is made locally. So this will help us to maybe think again how we should adapt our business models to be more resilient to global supply chain. Our society is challenged. We can already observe the mutations in our social relations. How we greet people. We can no longer touch, handshake. How these social norms are going to evolve? Are they going to be descriptive or prescriptive? Our social capital is really challenged again. We have so many people who are angry around the world, and their disposition to contribute, to follow the government instructions. Are we going to move to a personalization of citizens, like those who have been infected or who have a vaccine? Is this going to be public? Are we going to be personalized? So what will be the societal impacts from this crisis, from this pandemic? It is a good time to rethink what were the historic roles of the city. When we were a village, we were living in village, and one point in time, one man stand out, proposed a new governance, a new management, and we accepted it. It was a good value proposition for the citizens, and we invented the city, the concept of the city. The value proposition is that whoever will come to my city, his son and descendants will be richer than yourself, and the son of your son will be richer than your son. That was the initial value proposition of the city. Now, what should be the new role of the city? We are challenged. Our concept, our model, our modern model of the city is challenged because it doesn't work enough to sustain our city and our civilization. So there is this balance between cities and the rural environment. Should we move to the cities, or should we move back to the rural environment and have this natural social distance? Cities, actually, some cities are thinking of different concepts. Already now, they are thinking, for example, of the hour city, where within 1 hour around you, you should be able to find any services that you need. If you need to go to work, you go to study, or you go shopping, or you live, this should be within 1 hour walking distance. Because cities are a problem in terms of pandemics, but they also should be a solution, because they need to be resilient to climate change, but also to pandemics in the future. Cities are seen as community networks, and they have two types of autonomy. There is the conventional autonomy, where you have separated functions of the residential area, the business area, the shopping area, and in middle you can travel, you commute. And there is this functional autonomy, where we assume that within a certain distance around you, you should have access to all resources that you need. And this is where you are actually creating districts. District 1, District 2, District 3, etc. In fact, this type of functional autonomy is easier to quarantine. This was part of the initial design of Paris hundreds of years ago. The 20-minute neighborhood is a concept developed by Victoria State government. So within 20 minutes around where you are living, you can go shopping, you can go to work, or go to the parks or schools. Our homes, villas, and apartments are going to change in the future. Already some architects are working on it with some moving walls, moving parts in the apartments, because maybe there is a setting for the day and there is a setting for the night. We are going to work more and more from home. So how do we adapt this spatial organization to the home? The evolution of the office space will no longer be about how people occupy spaces, but how people use and interact with the spaces and between them. The office will change and probably will be downsized. With this digital transformation, which is going fast forward, with these new sensors that we have, these new applications, these new services, this is going to have an impact on our social norms. How are we going to be able to adapt that fast? We can focus on healthcare. We need, and we already have experienced remote diagnosis and telemedicine. Because sure, if you have an infectious disease, and especially if it's a lethal, unknown one, you don't want your doctor. Your doctor doesn't want to meet with you. So remotely, it will be fine. But we need an epidemic intelligence as a new science. We need to know more about epidemics before they become pandemics. So epidemic prediction should use the usual suspects like artificial intelligence, deep learning, cloud computing, big data. So let's use this new technology for our good now. We need fast and accurate diagnosis. We cannot wait 1 week, to understand, I have a lethal disease and I have actually infected so many and all my family. So biotechnology may be a good help to detect diseases. In this period of time, governments, they have big dilemmas. It's very difficult for governments. And I'm not saying because I'm part of a government, which is not the case, but they are living in a high confusion time. They have the dilemmas between the human rights and the health. What is the right balance? Because health is private. And now everybody knows you have the COVID-19. They have to balance between utility and privacy. They have to balance between being a surveillance state or utilitarianism. Whatever they do, it's for the greatest good. They have to decide between the global economy versus self-efficiency. Are they going to restructure the local economy? This is probably going to happen in some countries. So they have to take very difficult political decisions. And they are even more difficult that they don't have enough information to make those decisions. In terms of investment, before the pandemic, ESG funds were emerging. ESG funds are concerned with environmental, societal, and governance issues. In fact, evolution and investments, they respond to threat and risk. Today, it's the pandemic, and next will be the climate change. So what are the challenges which are revealed in 2020? We have an over-optimized supply chain. Should production be done near consumption? Should we move global to local? We have rigid living and working places. Should we have transformable and adaptable places? And we know that architects are working on it. We have lack of proximity to resources in cities. Should we work on civic homeostasis and functional autonomy? We have unsafe mass transit. Should we develop walkability and lightweight modes? Cities are complex systems with siloed organizations, where information is clustered. Should we improve more this collaboration and cooperation between the urban departments? To conclude, we understand the unthinkable is possible. Globalization can have negative local impacts. We understand that our living environment will change after this pandemic. The urban management of the city will change with the change of the society. We understand that we will rely more and more on technology, which will in fact change our society and our norms. We understand that we need to be ready for the next pandemic. I wish you the best of luck. Thank you. Thank you for your time during this webinar. Some of you have sent me some questions and I will try to answer them now. Do you think our model of the smart city is adapted to face COVID-19 pandemic? In the past, we did not know how pandemics did spread. Now we can identify, test, track, and isolate people using digital services. So thanks to the digital revolution, which is supported by the smart city strategy, it helps to identify and fight back faster than we ever had in our past, in our history. So the model of the smart city is working well, but it's not enough, because it's not acceptable to not be able to breathe in 2020. It's not acceptable to not be able to kiss someone in 2020. And you know how much we love kissing in France. So this model of the smart city should evolve after this pandemic. Are we ready for the next pandemic and what will happen? We have pandemics since thousands of years. In the last 20 years, we even have so many outbreaks. Is it possible to say that we are going to have another pandemic in the future? Yes, 100% sure another pandemic will come. What will be the government response? What will be the social response? It will all depend whether we have a vaccine or not. If we have a vaccine, then it's a matter of logistics. If we don't have a vaccine, then it's an unknown. Social response will be guided by what we have learned in the past, what we have learned 600 years ago. Face mask, social distancing, quarantine, isolation. We will do the same as during the COVID-19 lockdown, if it is a little unknown. So this is going to happen, and probably even before I die, unfortunately. Will we leave city centers and move to the countryside? This is the place where actually I have moved them. Have your grandparents ever told you about the Spanish flu in 1918? You know, it's quite recent, just 100 years ago. Your grandmother or grandmother. We are not studying this event at school. And we even have forgotten it. And in our families, we don't talk about this event. So today, yes, people, they want to leave the city center and move to the countryside. But after the COVID-19 crisis will stop, they will come back and they will forget the crisis. They will think it will not happen again. That's what the history has told us. So yes, today people want to leave cities, go to countryside, but they will come back immediately after the crisis is over. How was the impact of carbon emissions during the lockdown in cities? Here on the satellite photos in China, we see exactly the difference between before the lockdown and during the lockdown. The carbon emissions are significantly decreasing. Here it is in India, and here it is the same in Europe. Pandemics, in fact, they have a great positive impact on the global warming. So I'm not saying that we should have more and more pandemics, but as a matter of fact, they have great positive impacts. Can you introduce us the Master of City Sciences, which is delivered by RIT Dubai? With pleasure. So, RIT Dubai, we have created a master degree in city sciences. And the objective of this master degree is to help the participants to solve urban challenges, to better understand how cities are managed, and to help them to create future cities. We have a selection process, and we have participants coming from different backgrounds. They can be engineers, they can be urban planners, they can be people working for cities, people working in governments. So it's very diverse panel of participants. This master degree is delivered over 3 semesters, and you have to select different modules. I can show you an introduction video to present the master degree. So in this master degree, we have multiple modules. For example, we are learning the trends in cities, how cities were created in the past, why are they what they are today, and how will they become. We try to understand, to analyze how the digital transformation has impacted the development of the different departments in the cities, like how the police department is working, transportation department is working, energy department, water departments, waste management department, how these departments are working and how they are collaborating. We analyze also how investments are done in cities and how decision making could be done. So if you want to know more about this master degree, please contact the university, and one advisor will contact you. You can get more information on this URL, rit.edu/Dubai/city science. So you're welcome to visit this URL. Let me share my final thought as a conclusion to this webinar. The more we know about cities, about pandemics, the more we change our cities. And the more we change our cities, the more we change ourselves. I want to thank you very much for attending this webinar. It was a great pleasure having you. I hope it was a good use of your time. Thank you very much. Have a great week. Go and build great cities.